VinFuture Prize, a new global science and technology prize for humanity from Vietnam. One VinFuture grand prize of $3 million. 3 additional special VinFuture prizes valued at $500,000 each. VinFuture Prize honors science and technology work that creates or has a high potential to create meaningful change in the everyday lives of millions of people. Join us to make a change for a better future.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inaugural InnovaTalk webinar of 2024, presented to you by the VinFuture Foundation. My name is Tao Chen. I am the communication specialist of the VinFuture Foundation, and it is a pleasure to be your moderator for today. And while today we're delving into a topic of pretty much a paramount importance, obesity and novel advanced treatments. While obesity, it is now deemed as a global health issue, and that requires us for a full attention, innovation, and as well as collective resolve for novel solutions. And as we come to today's webinar in this virtual space, we hope that this webinar can serve as some sort of inspiration and of support for you to find probably hope or any sort of more knowledge in terms of this forefront topic. And to kickstart our webinar for today, let's take a look at our lineup of 3 exceptional panelists. And sharing today's event is Professor Alta Schutte, Professor and Principal Theme Lead of Cardiac, Vascular and Metabolic Medicine at University of New South Wales and George Institute for Global Health. She's also the former president of the International Society of Hypertension and member of the VinFuture Prize Pre-Screening Committee. Serving as our distinguished speaker for today's webinar is Professor Juul Holst, Professor of Medical Physiology and Senior Group Leader at the Novo Nordisk Foundation Center for Basic Metabolic Research at University of Copenhagen. He's also the laureate of the 2023 VinFuture Special Prize for Innovators with Outstanding Achievements in Emerging Fields. And last but definitely not least, representing the Vietnamese medical community is Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy, Head of the Department of Endocrinology at Bạch Mai Hospital and Chief of the Division of Endocrinology Department of Internal Medicine at Hanoi Medical University, Vietnam. And now, before we officially get started and meeting with our panelists, may I please invite you all to keep watch for our trailer for today's webinar. It provides a great introduction for the topics that we will be discussing and serves as an incredible discussion ahead. Please take a look.
Picture this. Science is always on the move, breaking barriers and reshaping our world. Diseases that once seemed invincible are now falling to our advances. We're venturing into the cosmos, unraveling the enigmatic workings of our bodies. Imagine if all this progress could tackle one of our greatest health battles, obesity. With healthcare innovations soaring, the fight against obesity is getting a powerful boost from the forefront of scientific discovery. And with that, the VinFuture webinar of 2024 titled Obesity and Novel Advanced Treatments. Chairing the webinar is Professor Alta Schutte, Professor and Principal Theme Lead of Cardiac, Vascular and Metabolic Medicine at University of New South Wales and George Institute for Global Health, and member of the VinFuture Prize Pre-Screening Committee. Professor Schutte has held key positions in various cardiovascular organizations, including past president of the Southern African Hypertension Society, secretary of the Australian Cardiovascular Alliance, past president of the International Society of Hypertension, and co-chair of Australia's National Hypertension Task Force. Serving as the distinguished speaker is Professor Juul Holst, Professor of Medical Physiology and Senior Group Leader at the Novo Nordisk Foundation Center for Basic Metabolic Research at University of Copenhagen. Professor Holst's great scientific achievements include the discovery of GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, a gut hormone regulating insulin secretion, appetite, and food intake, and his subsequent basic and translational research in this field. With an H-index of 160, he is among the most cited European scientists in his field. He has authored more than 1,900 publications that have received more than 107,857 citations. According to PubMed, he has 80 new articles in 2023 and 2024. Last but not least, representing the Vietnamese medical community is Dr. Nguyen Quang Bay, head of Department of Endocrinology, Bach Mai Hospital, Vietnam. He is also the Chief of Division of Endocrinology, Department of Internal Medicine, Hanoi Medical University. From 2019 to 2023, he was consistently named the best lecturer at Hanoi Medical University. His expertise has been well recognized, having served as a speaker and chairman at numerous national meetings and seminars. With a lineup of 3 exceptional speakers who are esteemed experts in their respective fields and a topic that is yet to be fully comprehended. Join us on this inaugural InnovaTalk webinar of 2024 as we discover the awe-inspiring power of novel advanced obesity treatments and the extraordinary potential they hold for the future of healthcare and humanity.
And ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our chair for today's webinar, Professor Alta Schutte, Professor and Principal Theme Lead of Cardiac, Vascular and Metabolic Medicine at University of New South Wales and George Institute for Global Health, Australia, and also a member of the VinFuture Prize Pre-Screening Committee. And without any further delay, I humbly pass the virtual stage to you, Professor, as we eagerly await your insights and guidance.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am quite excited to be with you all today and very much looking forward to the presentations by our distinguished speakers. It's really a great pleasure for me to introduce our distinguished guest speaker, Professor Juul Holst from the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. He is well known, as was just presented, with being one of the most distinguished researchers in Europe, but also globally, of course. And yes, won many global awards and accolades, but for us here from the VinFuture Pre-Screening Committee, for me it was quite an honor to be able to review his application among many others, and really delighted to hear him speak today, as he was the laureate in 2023 for this VinFuture Special Prize for Innovators with Outstanding Achievements in Emerging Fields. And it's important to perhaps highlight again what the summary of the winning entry was during this award ceremony, which was discovering the role of glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1, paving the way to widely used treatments for diabetes and obesity, and stimulating emerging applications for neurodegenerative diseases. It's not surprisingly, Dr. Holst, together with co-inventors Dr. Hol Habner, Dr. Svetlana Moshov, and Dr. Daniel Drucker, were included in the Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People in Health for 2024. And interestingly, not for their contributions to design a highly effective drug for diabetes, which was the original intention, or for heart disease, or perhaps Alzheimer's or other neurodegenerative diseases, but the Time magazine highlighted the impact of this drug for weight loss, which is perhaps the major challenge of our era. A few drugs have achieved the stardom that semaglutide, marketed in the United States as Ozempic or Wegovy, has today. The synthetic injectable version of this treatment is the flagship of the new category of drugs that rose to fame really in the medical and public arena as an effective weapon against obesity. And so much so that the Danish company Novo Nordisk is often unable to keep up with demand. So I'm truly excited to listen to the talk of Dr. Holst today as a distinguished speaker, and it's a great honor, and I think fantastic that he's agreed to host or to join us in this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these very kind words. Yeah, let us do a presentation in a hurry. So now I'm sharing my screen, and here we are. I hope you can all see it. I'm supposed to discuss GLP-1 based treatments for obesity and future directions here, and I'd love to do that. So let's move on. And so what are we talking about? We are talking about GLP-1, which is a peptide, a product of the precursor for glucagon, pro-glucagon. And when pro-glucagon is expressed and is formed in the gut, it is cleaved differentially, and out comes GLP-1 and actually GLP-2, which is another very interesting peptide. But we'll talk about that on another time. In the pancreas, of course, glucagon comes out of the cleavage of pro-glucagon. But now we're talking about GLP-1. And GLP-1 is an interesting peptide. So these are some of the very early data that we found. It did stimulate insulin secretion, and we were using for this an isolated perfused porcine pancreas. And what you can see is that if the glucose level is low, nothing happens. If it is normal, there's a small stimulation of insulin secretion. And if it is higher, there's a greater stimulation of insulin secretion. So it is glucose dependent. And the higher the glucose is, the stronger is the effect. And that is, of course, extremely expedient when you're talking about diabetes. But there's another very important part here, and that is that it also inhibits glucagon secretion. And as you know, glucagon secretion is elevated in type 2 diabetes and plays a role in the glucose production. So this is another very important feature of GLP-1, again demonstrated in an isolated perfused pancreas. So what you have here is an instrument that can both increase the release of insulin. And so this is what happens when blood glucose is rising after a meal intake, that you have a release of insulin, that will then increase the uptake of glucose in the body, in the liver, and bring down glucose. But if you're fasting, the problem is the opposite. Now glucose can be low, and then glucagon is released from the pancreas and starts to produce glucose from the liver. So by inhibiting glucagon secretion, mechanism of action for regulation of blood glucose, and that explains the power of GLP-1. And sure enough, if you look at what happened, these were some early data that we published, where we infused people with GLP-1 intravenously and looked at glucagon and insulin and glucose production in the liver, then you can see that glucagon secretion is inhibited, insulin secretion is stimulated, and as a result of these two changes, the hepatic glucose production is reduced by 30% or so. And as a result of that, blood glucose falls, but it doesn't fall very much, because once we have reached a level of around 4 or 4.5, then there's no more effect on the pancreas, and these effects will stop. So another very important feature of GLP-1 that we found back in the 90s was that it also inhibited appetite and food intake. And here you can see that infusions of physiological amounts of GLP-1 would inhibit hunger, it would slower, and would increase satiety. And as a result of that, you would have a decrease in food intake. Not a big one, but enough to make to play an important role. And at some stage, very early actually, we were able to put this graph up where we were looking at infusion rates of GLP-1 here and the energy intake, food intake here on the scale. And you can see that there is a very nice relationship between the two. The more you get of GLP-1, the more you inhibit food intake. And that's very important for the point of view of today, where dosing is a very important issue. So how is it about the mechanism of action of GLP-1? And here you're seeing a graph that illustrates how the L cell, which is down here in a villus in the gut, releases GLP-1, which is then taken up by capillaries, but it's destroyed by the enzyme DPP-4, which then ruins the molecule and it's no longer active. And in the liver, there's another set of DPP-4 that can reduce further the activity of GLP-1, and also into the circulation there is some DPP-4. And that means that we're down to very few percent of the originally released GLP-1 that may reach the pancreas and stimulate insulin secretion. But what it can do in the meantime is to interact with neurons, with sensory afferents of the vagus and also other neurons here in the gut, that can send signals up to the brainstem here, to the nucleus of the solitary tract, and from there may influence both motor nuclei, vagal motor nuclei, and also interact with neurons that signal to the hypothalamus and to centers. So that's the mechanism of action. And actually, you can see it here. To the left, you see where GLP-1, or rather semaglutide, goes when you inject it into an animal. And you can see that it hits regions of the brain that are simply the circumventricular organs, in particular the area postrema and the median eminence. And to the right, you can see which neurons are being activated by this, and you can see particularly the parabrachial nucleus solitary tract of the solitary tract, and as I said, and a few other centers are being activated. So the important point here is GLP-1 goes to the brain, but it doesn't enter the brain, but it activates neurons that are essential for activity of appetite regulating and reward centers in the brain. So this is what these figures show. I told you is very rapidly degraded by DPP-4, and it's also cleared in the kidneys. And the problem is really big because the survival half-life of GLP-1 in the circulation is just 1 to 2 minutes, and the clearance is huge. And the kidneys are also responsible for a major removal of GLP-1. So you cannot use GLP-1 as a drug. So something had to be done. And the drugs that have been available or have been developed here are liraglutide and semaglutide. And the solution to the problem here was to attach a fatty acid to the molecule. Then it binds to albumin and is protected from DPP-4 and protected from elimination in the kidney. And the difference here is what makes it the half-life longer or shorter. You can also use dulaglutide, where the GLP-1 sequence was coupled to a large molecule. And here's a very interesting peptide, tirzepatide, which is a GLP-1 GIP co-agonist, very important. Also, it has a long period of activity because of coupling to an acid. These over here are short-acting and are not interesting, except that exenatide also exists in a weekly version. But the most important are the ones to the right. And the really, really important thing is here from a cardiovascular outcome trial with semaglutide in 3,000 people looked at for 2 years is that you can decrease the risk of major cardiovascular outcomes in case cardiovascular death, non-fatal myocardial infarction, or non-fatal stroke, which in this study was reduced by 26%. This was really very, very important because now it's not only about kilograms and glucose, it's also about survival. And sure enough, here is a meta-analysis of all the studies, the cardiovascular outcome trials that have been made with these compounds, the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And you can see that they all reduce MACE except for the short-acting ones. So let's forget about the short-acting ones. They don't help us very much. And if you look at a meta-analysis of the various studies, you can see that myocardial infarction is reduced, stroke is reduced, cardiovascular mortality is reduced, all-cause mortality is reduced, even heart failure is improved. And actually, in type 2 diabetic individuals, this reduction of the risk of stroke, which is shown here for all the studies, highly significant, is very, very important because stroke is difficult to handle. The SGLT2 inhibitors do not do that. The DPP-4 inhibitors do not do that. Here we're looking at stroke, a pooled analysis of the effects of semaglutide on stroke. And again, you can see this very remarkable effect on the risk of developing stroke while you're on therapy. And here another result outcome of the SUSTAIN 6 trials of semaglutide, that is nephropathy, new or worsening nephropathy. And you see that this is reduced by 36%, which is also very important. And it's not only because of an improvement in macroalbuminuria, it is also because there is an improvement in a slowing down of the deterioration of glomerular filtration rate. This is what you see in these studies, in the patients. This is the annual decrease in glomerular filtration rate. But once you're on therapy, you can almost halve this decrease. So it also has effect on this very important measure of kidney function. And sure enough, this was studied in detail in the so-called FLOW trial, where 3,500 people were looked at for several years, and where there was a decrease in the kidney outcomes by 24% in this very important FLOW trial. So this is really encouraging. Now, let's have a look at the body weight. So this is what happened in a group of people looked at with placebo and advice for 52 weeks for 1 year. This is with liraglutide, the high dose. That's a nice decrease in body weight. And this is the dose response studies or effects of semaglutide up to a higher dose. This is given daily to avoid the problems with the up-titration, which can take a very long time. So you can see with this kind of dosing, there's again, as I pointed out before, there's a dose response related effect here. And in this study, the high dose took people up to 14% weight loss. And this was then utilized or made use of in the STEP trials with Wegovy. Here you can see the 2.4 milligrams semaglutide dosing. And in this study, this is just one of the STEP trials. They're very much alike. Here there was an almost 18% weight loss during 68 weeks in this study. So it's very, very powerful in terms of body weight loss. If you stop therapy, your body weight will return to where it came from. Now, semaglutide 2.4 milligram has also been studied in a real big cardiovascular outcome trial in people without diabetes, but with obesity and cardiovascular risk. And this is the SELECT trial, which is one of the most important trials ever done. It shows a 20% reduction in the risk of major adverse cardiovascular event during therapy with SELECT in this almost 4-year trial in the 17,600 people. So this is really, really convincing evidence for the good effects of the GLP-1 receptor agonists. And there are more. So this is tirzepatide. I just mentioned it in the beginning, but this study of tirzepatide, which is a GLP-1 GIP co-agonist, people were looked at with diabetes, and you can see that 50% of those that were treated in this SURPASS-2 trial actually reached an A1C level of less than 5.7%. That is remission values. That is normal. It's on therapy, of course, but it's normal. So it means that you can push back the disease to invisible limits here if you use this compound in 50% of the people. This is a sensational result. And also, this is very powerful in terms of food intake and weight loss. Here you can see the SURMOUNT-4 trial for 88 weeks, where it's very nicely shown that you can obtain an almost 26% weight loss reduction over these 88 weeks, and which is nicely maintained. So what is the future of the incretin agents? Will there be side effects? Will there be cancers? Fortunately, there's a lot of data now that indicate that this is a very low risk. It is not increased. If anything, it is getting decreased. These days, there was a very recent report of a decreased rate of risk of colon cancer. And this may be because of the weight loss, which is because colon cancer is increased with obesity. But still, we don't need to worry too much about that. Pancreatitis. These huge cardiovascular outcome trials have fortunately taught us that the pancreatitis risk is extremely small and not big as it was considered for some years ago. Will suicide be a problem? No, there are several studies now that have shown that there's no increased risk of suicidal ideation or anything like that. Gallstones. Yes, there will be gallstones, because if you lose weight, you will also increase your rate of gallstones. But you just need to know this, and it's not a really serious complication here. Sarcopenia. Will that happen? Yes, it will. If you lose weight, you will lose about a third of the weight loss will be on your lean body mass. That is always the case if you lose by eating less. So that is a very important fact, and that means that while you are titrating up to your dose up to get to the weight loss you wish, you must start exercising, doing physical exercise to counteract this sarcopenia, which otherwise indefinitely will happen. Alopecia, yes, we know that some people, very few, but some people will have alopecia because that is what we see after a weight loss. Another danger that is out there is bad products, because there will be a lot of false products out there on the market. Gastroparesis, yes, that is again a physiological action of the hormone. It does slow down gastrointestinal motility, and you need to know this. So people that have a very strong tendency to develop problems with that should be looked at further. Malnutrition because of low food intake? Yes, of course. So you need to consider your diet while you have it. Ileus intestinal obstruction is, of course, also a consequence of these normal actions. So people do not stay on the drug. It is said 40% was on drug 1 year after the prescription. Why is that? Is it side effects, price, impatience, lack of understanding, loss of reward? Maybe loss of reward is a very important thing. Tachyphylaxis, not so much. What are you supposed to do after the weight loss? As I said, lifestyle changes are essential. In a new study, weight loss was maintained for a second year after diet-induced weight loss, followed by 1 year maintenance with exercise, but only with exercise. So this is going to be very important. So what I've said is that GLP-1 is an important incretin hormone. It has effects on food intake and appetite. It acts via afferent neurons and the CNS. GLP-1 agonists are very effective anti-diabetic drugs. They have protective effects on the cardiovascular system and offer renal and neuroprotection. And there's no doubt that the GLP-1 receptor agonist will change obesity and diabetes therapy in the future. Thank you very much for your attention.
For your very insightful opening remarks, and we're very much appreciative of Professor Jens Juul Holst for your very informative incredibly informative presentation. And just for our audience information, Professor Jens Juul Holst has also been named as one of the inaugural Time 100 health list of the world's most influential people in health. So we extend congratulations to you. And moving on, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce our representative of the Vietnamese medical community, and this is Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy, Head of Department of Endocrinology, Bạch Mai Hospital, Vietnam. He's also the Chief of Division of Endocrinology, Department of Internal Medicine, Hanoi Medical University. And just a little bit of information about him. From 2019 to 2023, Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy consistently earned the prestigious title of the best lecturer at Hanoi Medical University, and his expertise has been very much well recognized, having served as the speaker and chairman at numerous national meetings and seminars. And now please join me in welcoming Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy to the virtual stage.
Thank you very much for kind introduction of MC. Dear friends and colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee to invite me to give a short presentation in this symposium. My presentation today is Challenges and Unmet Needs for Obesity Management in Vietnam. You may know that overweight and obesity was very rare in Vietnam about 30 years ago. However, it is quite common now. In this slide, you can see the prevalence of obesity in a study in 2015. So the high prevalence of overweight and obesity is observed in urban areas and in women older than 35 years of age, and it ranges maybe from 6 to 10 or 12%. But unfortunately, in a study in 2020, the prevalence of overweight and obesity increased to 21.5%. It is similar to India. Also, obesity prevalence in Vietnam is low compared to other countries in Asia, but it grows rapidly. So it is a real and big threat to our country. You may know that obesity is associated with numerous comorbidities, including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dyslipidemia, hypertension, several forms of cancer, and many more. These diseases have very high mortality and morbidity, as in this slide. In this slide, you can see a significant reduction in communicable disease that have been substituted in the ranking of major causes of mortality and morbidity by non-communicable disease. And you can see nearly 80% of mortality in Vietnam come from NCD now. Consequently, in 2019, we estimate that Vietnam lost about $3.7 billion US, equivalent to 1.1% of GDP, due to obesity and overweight and its comorbidity. And we estimate that we may lose about $103 billion US in 2060 if we can't control this problem. So because we now realize this problem, so in 2020, the Prime Minister of Vietnam government had approved the national strategy on nutrition in periods 2021 to 2030. And after that, the Ministry of Health issued the guideline for obesity diagnosis and management. So you can see in the content of this guideline, the guideline cover all fields of obesity treatment, including diet, physical activity, psychological management, medication, and bariatric or metabolic surgery. It also have one chapter on obesity in children and adolescents. So far, there are 3 common treatment methods for obesity in Vietnam. The first is intensive lifestyle therapy, but it has low effectiveness due to poor compliance. The second is surgery. Metabolic surgery or bariatric surgery has been applied in Vietnam for about 10 years in some big center. So far, it's the most effective method, but it is too expensive for many people. And regarding the medicine, weight loss in Vietnam now, we have only stat and one GLP-1 receptor agonist is liraglutide. Both are not covered by health insurance, and it is also considered it's very expensive for many people. Also, we have the national guideline, but because our resource is limited, so the guideline was not implemented well. We have a center for obesity management in some center hospital, and obesity people might have treatment in various departments. By most are not well-trained physicians such as endocrinologists or cardiologists or oncologists, where they have some complication of obesity. Other obesity people have a treatment with nutritional expert or even by some health coach, or sometimes they follow some advertisement on TV. In addition, because of the financial barrier and ineffective of available medication, many obese people look for treatment with traditional medicine or medicine with unknown origin, which have many serious side effects. So in this slide, you can see many charming advertisements of a weight loss drug in the black market, and some patients were admitted because of serious adverse event when they take this medication. That's why, in my opinion, I think that in order to improve outcome obesity management in Vietnam, we have to do the following tasks as soon as possible. Firstly, we must establish more multidisciplinary center for treating obesity. The second is the Ministry of Health need to approve new high-efficacy weight loss such as semaglutide and tirzepatide, as Professor Holst mentioned in his presentation. It is not available in Vietnam now. And the third is the government should provide health insurance for obesity treatment totally or partly. And finally, and last but not least, we must carry out more media campaign to promote healthy lifestyle for all people, especially for children. So in summary, in my presentation, you can see that the rate of obesity is increasing rapidly in Vietnam, especially in children and adolescents in urban area. And obesity treatment in Vietnam has many barriers and challenges. And GLP-1 receptor agonist drug is highly effective in weight loss, but it is expensive and difficult to access in Vietnam. And it is necessary to implement strategy and program to manage and prevent obesity in Vietnam now. It is my presentation. So thank you very much for your attention.
Well, Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy, thank you very much for your brief yet highly informative presentation. And before we move on to our Q&A segment, I would like to wrap up our individual presentations by inviting back to the virtual stage our three panelists for today, Professor Alta Schutte, Professor Jens Juul Holst, and Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bày. And this part, we would like to call it panel reflection. It is for our panelists to make any additional comments or any sort of questions that they would like to add on to their presentation. Can I please have our three speakers back to the screen, please?
Thank you very much. Perhaps I could start by firstly congratulating again the whole outline of especially how GLP-1 was discovered as this key component as well as DPP-4. And now that we have it as a treatment, perhaps good to discuss a bit in terms of the implementation of this globally. I think Dr. Bey also clearly reflected on the challenge of access. I'm sure we'll get to that a bit further in the discussions. But one thing that was mentioned by Dr. Holst was it's not only this treatment that's the solution, it is a balance of changing diet and changing lifestyle. And but what I also wanted to highlight, perhaps what was really clear from your presentation, is that it doesn't really, this treatment doesn't let the fat cells disappear magically. It's not some sort of magic treatment. It actually affects our human physiological processes of appetite and satiety. And therefore the consequences and some of the side effects that you've mentioned are related to what happens when these conditions change. So it is, I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind, because people, when this is a synthetic drug, there's often wrong assumptions going along with that. It's normal physiological processes that are just affected in a beneficial way, really, with remarkable benefits. So maybe I start off with Dr. Holst and just ask, in terms of, would you like to elaborate a bit more in terms of the balance between using the medication? You mentioned after 1 year, 40% cessation rates, which is quite high, and the importance of lifestyle and physical activity. How do you see that sort of model, going forth from high income countries more to low resource settings? And can you see a pathway forward with that in mind?
So those are very, very important questions, all of them. And yeah, I completely agree with your analysis and the importance of each of these points. I think that right now, the big thing, of course, is the shortage of the material of both the tirzepatide and semaglutide. And we know actually already that these companies will not be able to cover the world market at all for several years ahead of us. But fortunately, there are other companies that are strongly engaged in this. Actually, all over the globe, there are companies that are developing these drugs. And some of them are not so concerned about the licensing rules. So what I understand is that at least in 2026, there will be a lot of material produced without license, because the patent is not off at that time yet. But still, it will be made. It will be made both in South America and in China and in Russia. They're already doing it. So there's a lot of fake material out there. So the problem is to make sure that you don't get hold of something that is bad. There was a story of people putting insulin in some of the syringes and selling them as if they were semaglutide, which is, of course, hugely dangerous. So that's terrible. But you have to be prepared for some of the weaknesses of human nature, I'm afraid, here. But there's no doubt that there will be a huge surge now of more companies trying to develop this. And that, of course, will lower the price, which is important. In addition, there are several oral small molecules with GLP-1 activity that are under development. And some of them look really, really good, with similar weight loss effects and similar effects on blood glucose. They are easier to produce because, the others are peptide-based. They're actually biologicals. And that's not for everybody to do that. This is fermentation and things like that, which are complicated. But the chemical synthesis of the small molecules could be much simpler. So if they are successful, they have not passed phase 3 yet, but they look very, very good. So my expectation is that we will have a lot of these. Actually, there are several compounds that look very good out there. And pretty soon, I would think, And that should also lower the price considerably. So price is a huge problem. And of course, these companies, you cannot persuade them to not try to make the profit, because that's why they're there. But there will be a pressure all over. And, you know, it's already a huge problem. So what happened in my own country, there was reimbursement for Ozempic for diabetes, not for Wegovy, but for Ozempic for diabetes. And it almost ruined our public health system. So they emptied their money boxes completely, and the whole system is breaking down. So of course they're now making regulations that you cannot have automatic reimbursement for Ozempic anymore. And what did the company do? They reduced the price by 1/4. That has just happened.
Wow.
So these are some of the developments we're looking into, and they're really, really interesting, of course. And also in America, there's now a big pressure to lower the price, because also the American health system cannot afford these huge expenses. So there will be developments here, that's for sure. So there will be better, more material, and the prices will come down. Whether they will come down to, you know, a global, not immediately. It will take some time. But we can only hope, and you know, we are moving from medicine into political issues here, and of course that is not for me to do that. I mean, I'm an expert in medicine, but certainly not in politics, and I shouldn't interfere here. But we can all hope that somebody will have their senses and try to do something about this. The number of people that should have these compounds are those that develop what we call the metabolic syndrome with obesity. That means that they have, you know, effects on the lipids and blood pressure and glucose and all that, that increase their risk of developing cardiovascular disease and dying from it. And it's a considerably increased risk they're running. And that's where I think people deserve to have these medications, now that it is proven that it really does help. So we have to do something about it. There's no doubt about that. So maybe this is a little bit of a hint to the politicians to do something about it.
Thank you. I think this is very insightful. I'm sure we'll go a bit further into especially the availability and access. I was wondering, Dr. Bay, you've mentioned the next steps in Vietnam to ensure there's also access, and at least it's approved by government. Do you know if there's already been some conversations in terms of those next steps for access and for insurance for covering these medicines?
Yes, I think it's a very big problem in Vietnam as in other developing country. You know that in Vietnam we have only liraglutide now, and liraglutide is approved for the first for treatment of type 2 diabetes, and now for obesity as a guideline of Ministry of Health. But for even for type 2 diabetes patient, liraglutide is subsidized by only about 30% of the price of liraglutide. So now we are trying to persuade them, that's the government officer and Ministry of Health, that we should increase the subsidy of the liraglutide for type 2 diabetes patient. So we also had some meeting with some health insurance department and Ministry of Health and some other partner, that we should cover at least about 20 or 30% for obesity treatment with liraglutide in Vietnam now. But I think it is difficult. You might know that in Vietnam, the total money for health insurance is maybe only about more than 4 billion US dollar. That's why we have many challenges, many communicable disease and non-communicable disease like hypertension and diabetes and cancer. That's why the health insurance department, they answer that they must consider and get some, we have to wait for some economic study about that, whether the cover or increase the prevalence of cover for liraglutide, it is good for patient, of course, but they must keep the balance, the fund for other disease. And another problem that in Vietnam, people usually think that when an overweight or obesity people, it means rich people, like rich people, so they must or they can pay themselves the treatment fee for obesity. That's why we may get some difficult to purchase health insurance to cover treatment fee for obesity people in Vietnam now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think this is a common problem in most of the world, particularly in low and middle income countries, of course. I want to stop our reflection now and hand back to our MC. I'm sure we'll have further time for Q&A right after that intro from the MC.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists for your contributions, and we'll see each other once again back in the Q&A segment. And before that can even happen, may I please invite you all to, well, let's give our panelists a very well-deserved break of 5 minutes first, and then after that, we'll reconvene after for the Q&A segment. And in the meantime, I would like to invite our audience to keep watch for a short tutorial on how to submit your nominations to the VinFuture Prize. Please take a look.
Greetings from the VinFuture Prize. Please find instructions for the nominator following these steps. To begin, you can access the nomination portal at online.vinfutureprize.org/nomination. Or you can scan the QR code you see on the screen right now to open the nomination webpage. On this webpage, you can download the instructions and the endorsement letter template. In the instructions, you will find the complete nomination form, where you can draft the nomination whenever you have time. Then, you can copy and paste the draft into the online portal. Please click on Sign Up, and upon successful registration, you can simply use your ID and password to log in. After login, please click Nominate Now to start a new nomination form. Subsequently, you can see 7 content tabs on the nomination form. To begin the nomination process, on the first tab, please select the prize category as well as the type of nominee, whether it is an individual nominee or a group of nominees. Then click the Start button to proceed to the second tab. And we would like to call your attention to tab number 5 and tab number 7. On tab number 5, your evaluation, you're invited to give your evaluation of the nominee's invention, including its groundbreaking discovery, scientific fundamental knowledge, specific approach, uniqueness, and advancement. Then you are required to clarify if the invention can be transferred to a product and highlight its most significant socioeconomic impacts. This includes the number of beneficiaries, such as people, countries, and continents. Additionally, please explain how you believe this invention has or will potentially transform the everyday lives of millions, if not billions, of people. Next, please provide information on the history of the invention, such as when and how it started, and who else, except the nominee or nominees, was involved in initiating or contributing to the invention. About tab number 7, supporting documentation and evidence. There are several important documents that the nomination portal and form require, and we would like to call your attention to 3 critical items. The first one is the CV of your nominee or the CVs of your group of nominees if you are nominating a group of people. The second important item is the endorsement letter. 3 endorsement letters or more are strongly encouraged, but 1 is mandatory. The third one is the additional form of nominees. Please be as specific as possible when providing the information. Additionally, you are strongly encouraged to include any valid intellectual properties, publications, patents, or other supporting documents that provide evidence for the nomination. Finally, after filling out and providing all the content in the 7 tabs, please click on the Submit button at the bottom of the page to submit your nomination. If you have any questions or you face any technical issues, please email us at secretariat@vinfutureprize.org. We will be more than happy to assist you in your nomination process. Thank you very much.
And well, ladies and gentlemen, one of the most highly anticipated parts is now upon us, the Q&A segment. And during this section, we would highly encourage you to use the raise hand function in the Zoom chat box if you want to interact or engage with our speakers in a more direct approach. And of course, if you prefer a more indirect approach, you can just simply type in your questions in the chat box, and we will try our best to assign your questions to a suitable speaker. And now we've actually received quite several questions from our audience, and the first one is actually addressed to our representative of the Vietnamese medical community, Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy. From a researcher, they would like to ask about the role of metformin in obese patients.
Yes, metformin is very old medication for type 2 diabetic patient. Some study found that metformin can help type 2 diabetic patient lose maybe about 1 or 2 or 3 kilogram. But some study found that metformin is neutral for weight loss, for weight in type 2 diabetic patient. So it can help, but cannot be a medication to treat obesity or overweight in type 2 diabetic patient. Is my question and my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bảy. And the next question is actually addressed to Professor Juul Holst from a doctor, Dr. Phương in the audience. In scientific products, there is polycystic ovary syndrome, a high rate of obese patients accompanied by sugar extraction and metabolic disorders. So is GLP-1 effective in this group of patients? And when women are overweight, can they use GLP-1?
Yeah, so it is actually, and this has been tried, and it's being used by several doctors and endocrinologists, particularly for the treatment of polycystic ovary syndrome. And you know, there's a problem, a small problem here, and that is that it's really effective, and these people become pregnant very soon after the therapy has been started. So there's a huge increase in the pregnancy rate, and that poses a small problem because it's not supposed to be given to pregnant people because there was some problems in the toxicology studies with rodents, developing rodents. So that's why it has been not been advised for people that are planning pregnancies at all. While you're in therapy, I will still respect those rules and say you should not plan for a pregnancy while you're on the therapy. Fortunately, we have a huge experience now because millions and millions of people have taken these medications and have become pregnant, and nothing has happened in terms of malformation so far. So that's really very reassuring. But personally, I would advise against being on a GLP-1 agonist, particularly these high power agonists, if you are planning a pregnancy. I would advise against that.
Thank you very much to Professor Holst. And the next question is addressed to Professor Alta. What is your view on the longer-term treatment obesity with GLP analogs after initial weight loss? And would you consider permanent treatment viable, and with full dose or perhaps a lower dose?
I would definitely direct this to Dr. Holst. This is definitely his area of expertise. Dr. Holst, I think you should.
I would be pleased to answer this. So in principle, you must stay on the dose and the therapy. And the reason is a physiological one, because what happens when you take these drugs is that you reduce your appetite, then you reduce your food intake, and then you start losing weight. As you start losing weight, you also decrease your energy expenditure. And eventually, at some rate, at some time, there is again a balance between the energy expenditure and the energy intake. And that's when you stop losing weight. It's not because the drugs don't work any longer. It's simply because there's now a new balance between the reduced food intake and your reduced energy expenditure. So if you stop taking the drug at that stage, you will regain your appetite, you will regain your food intake, and you will regain your energy expenditure, and the things will go back, precisely to where they came from. So that means that in principle, physiological, physiologically, you should stay on that dose. But fortunately, this is not true because there's a lot you can do. As I said, the most important is it may take up to half a year to get to the top dose. And actually, I recommend even longer up titration periods, perhaps up to 1 year, to reduce any risk of side effects. So, I mean, if there's some side effect, why don't you stay on the dose you're at? It will work. It will work. New studies have shown that some people are slow in developing the full effect. Others are faster. But if it's not happening immediately or as planned, then wait, take it easy. It will come. It will come. So the most important is to use this up titration period to change your lifestyle. And that is to reduce your food intake by planning a new diet, and you can do that. This is the virtue of these therapies, that you're able to do it because you change your feeling of hunger. You're changing your appetite. You're changing your attitude towards food. You don't have the murmur or noise of food any longer. You don't have the craving. You can do it. You can change your diet to a less calorie rich and a healthier composition, and it doesn't harm you while you're doing it because of the therapy. The other thing is that you should also change your physical exertion schedules because, again, you can do it. You will lose weight, and that means that it will be easier to move around. And this is a big problem for very big people. It's a definite problem. Most of them, that have arthritis problems, and they will be better. They will be improved significantly during therapy. So all in all, will be easier to plan a new physical activity level. And if you do that, then once you have reached your dose, you can actually stop the therapy and see what happens. And if it goes terribly, then perhaps you can start with a low dose. And it's also possible that you could use other things, other drugs that are easier to handle. But first of all, and most importantly, it's the change in lifestyle that should be substituting your previous life, and that will be so extremely helpful in the continuation of the therapy. Intermittent dosing is also possible. I mean, you can do it. It will mean up titration again, but that doesn't matter. You can do it. Go ahead, try it. So everybody should try for themselves how to do this.
Well, thank you very much. And this next question, Professor Alta Schutte, I think this is actually the one for you. As a member of the VinFuture Prize Pre-Screening Committee, what key criteria do you believe are essential when evaluating GLP-1 innovation, and how has it impacted, and how will it impact human well-being?
Thank you very much. Yes, I think it's important to look at the criteria that we use when reviewing nominations for the VinFuture prizes. And particularly two main areas that we focus on is the degree of the scientific advancement. How novel is this discovery? How big is the advancement in the field with this discovery? How competitively unique is it compared to other nominations or other products? And then the second component that's often not included in many other prizes is really the degree of meaningful change and impact that is the result of a specific innovation. And for the emerging prizes, particularly as in the case of GLP-1 receptor antagonist awards, it is really the potential impact to benefit millions of people in the next 10 years. And I think we've heard the fantastic presentation today again about the immense potential of this discovery for global health, particularly starting with obesity, and then all these consequent potential benefits, whether it's heart disease, diabetes, neurodegenerative diseases, even liver and kidney disease. So I think this is the elements that really tick the boxes. This is a super novel discovery with substantial, meaningful potential to impact millions, if not billions, in the future.
Agree.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the very last question for today's Q&A segment, and also that just wrapped up today's webinar. And as we reach the conclusion of today's webinar, Obesity and Novel Advanced Treatments, we would like to extend our deepest appreciation to our esteemed panelists, Professor Alta Schutte, Professor Jens Juul Holst, and Dr. Nguyễn Quang Bey. Your contributions have enlightened us all, and of course, your profound insights have tremendously enriched our understanding of the topics deliberated upon. And we also want to extend our appreciation to our audience for joining with us throughout this webinar, and for your engagement in the Q&A segment. We're very grateful to have this opportunity to do this sort of event to help impart the wisdom from our esteemed panelists to you. And once again, thank you very much for joining and being a part of this InnovaTalk webinar. We cannot wait to see you again in other InnovaTalk webinars for this year. Thank you very much, and goodbye.